Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Coach Quip. I'm Coach Robyn.
I'm Coach Chris.
And this is episode 172.
All right, today we are talking about how weather impacts your running pace. We've done this in the past about heat, but I don't think we've done it about cold.
And I think, to your point, I think a lot of times people don't think about how it impacts when it's extremely cold. I know internally for our athletes that are in Run Club and Tri Club, we'll talk about it with them. But publicly, you don't hear a lot of chatter of like, it's X degrees, how do I scale?
Yeah, definitely, because in the heat, we are sweating, and we know that that impacts our pace. I think we can physically feel the impact of heat on our running more than we can on the cold. So yeah, it's not top of mind here, just like hydrating in the winter isn't really top of mind. I think we know that people run better as it's cooler, and so we don't really think about the other ways in which that might negatively impact our run performance.
You know us, we love an outdoor run. And really, truly, thanks COVID for this, we see the majority of our runners opting for outside year round because that's what we could do for a while. And the return to treadmill training, and I love treadmills, they're a great training tool, but it just hasn't come back. So outside is where it's at. When you're outside, you get lots of variations on terrain. You're, of course, self-powered, right? You are propelling yourself forward by your own volition, and you get your nature fix. Right? We're going to find water and trees whenever possible for those two things. But temperature, if you're out there, you're exposed. It's going to play a significant role in how your body performs, whether that's hot or cold. So before very cold weather and extreme, we know that it can drastically affect your running pace. Of course, we've talked about heat, and now we're going to talk all about the cold, so you can prep yourself maybe for this weekend for F3 or definitely for February, because that is historically the coldest month out of the year.
Okay, so let's talk about the effects of cold weather on your running pace. We know that temperatures below about 40 degrees can actually improve your running performance to a certain extent. I think people are hesitant to go outside, but in the chillier weather, because getting from warm inside to cold outside is the hardest part.
And the first 10 minutes.
That too, yeah. A proper warm-up is a really good thing. But once we're into it, our runners see great results in the cooler weather. Like, this is the reason why when people are running marathons and it's 55 degrees, they're like, oh, it was a little warm.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, right, because it's that whole 20-degree rule of like whatever it is, adding 20 degrees, and that's kind of what your body experiences. So if it's 30, then it's really 50 when you're running, which is getting into that prime range, which we'll go into.
Yeah. So cooler air allows your body to perform and move more efficiently, and you don't have to work as hard to regulate your body temperature, and that's the big struggle in the summer months. This can improve your endurance and result in some faster paces, especially in runners who are dressed properly. So this is a really big key point.
Didn't we just do an episode on this?
You know, if you need more information about dressing properly for cold weather, go back to episode 171, where we just talked about all the ways you can layer up so that you can make sure that you are running with the right gear on.
So we've got a few reasons how cold weather actually helps you as a runner. Number one, improved efficiency. Your body, straight up, it just does not extend as much energy cooling itself down when you're in cold conditions. You're already cold. So it's not like, hey, we gotta get a ton of air on your skin. It's just not gonna get there. So you can actually conserve your energy for running.
Yeah, the cool thing about this is that when we go outside just as a regular person, right, in the cold weather, you start to shiver to warm yourself. And your body is using energy to keep it warm. But you're using energy on running, which automatically increases your temperature. Yep. So you are going to be good. Number two is reduced overheating. So cold weather helps us prevent overheating and reduces the risk of fatigue that comes with that extra expenditure of energy. And you can sustain efforts usually without the heat-induced weariness that you typically find once those temperatures are in the 60s or higher.
Yeah, totally. We all know that weariness where you're like, woo, you feel like you're cooking. You don't get that in the cold. Next up, number three is optimal breathing. Cold air can actually stimulate better oxygen uptake and deeper breaths, which is pretty cool. Although, note that for some runners, because air can actually be pretty dry and obviously cold, it can cause some type of irritation in the throat and lungs, especially when you start doing it. So I always like to start, and I know we have got tips too, but having a buff on to be able to pull air through and try to help humidify air going into my lungs before I'm truly warmed up, and then I'll kind of gradually bring it down. Or if it's your first time out in the cold, give it a little bit shorter of a duration and then beef that up, just like we acclimate to the heat.
Now we're going to talk about some pace adjustments that you can make in order to optimize your cold weather running. So while running in the cold does promote better performance typically, there's also a limit to that. So if temperatures are below freezing, we find that you might have some discomfort in your extremities, particularly like fingers, toes, right? Like we both have had issues with this.
Yep. We're older than you.
But we don't look it.
Tricks.
So for a lot of runners, the ideal temperature range for performance-enhancing cold weather running is in that sweet spot of like 30 degrees to 50 degrees. Anything above that, you have to think about that temperature regulation with heat, and anything below that, you really have to be smart with how you're layering and how you're protecting your skin.
I call that pug weather, 30 to 50.
Oh, yeah?
It's ironic and not lost on me that pug weather and marathon weather are the same weather. I'm just saying. They're kind of the perfect breed for this environment. Next up is pace advantage. So research really kind of suggests that well-conditioned runners in colder temperatures, you're going to have an increase in performance of approximately 2 to 5% compared to runs in moderate temperatures. So again, going back from that 30 to 50 degree range, you could actually have quite the boost.
Mm-hmm. So as we're thinking about adjusting our pace, we also should be thinking about some of the risks that you may experience in running in colder weather, and particularly that colder weather below 30 degrees. So in those extremely cold conditions, the risk of frostbite, of muscle cramps, and of joint pain exponentially increases. And we know that it's really important to dress in layers, like we mentioned before, but also to use those moisture-wicking fabrics, and to have dry clothes to change into when you're done with
Do not keep your wet sports bra on, please.
But we've both experienced this of like the cold fingers, the cold toes, or the frostbite. Once you get it,
you're a lot more susceptible in the future.
A lot more susceptible, and if you have Raynaud's syndrome, that's also something that is really difficult to run outside with. So you have to know yourself and know that you have the appropriate clothes on, but sometimes clothes, like for Raynaud's, isn't going to help.
Yep. So we know that there's going to be an impact of temperature on pace, right? As it gets colder, really past that 30 degree threshold, we're going to start to see a little bit of degradation of our pace. Not as much as, or as dramatic as heat, of course, but our bodies are still trying to keep themselves a little bit warm as the temperatures plummet, as they may or may not be doing this weekend at F3. So, for example, at 50 degrees, if you were running an 8-minute mile, that's going to be our baseline, right? Ideal running conditions, 50 degrees, 8-minute mile. If it gets colder, we said 32 to 50 is kind of our sweet spot, right? If it gets colder than 32, so 32 to 20 degrees, so just say 20 to 30 to make your life easy, we're looking at a 1 to 2% decrease in pace. So that 8-minute mile becomes an 8:07-minute mile, right? If you go down from there and go from 20 to 10 degrees, you're looking at a 3 to 4% decrease in pace. So that 8-minute mile goes to 8:17. And if we're going from 10 to 0, we're looking at a 5 to 6% decrease. So it becomes an 8:26. Below that, when we get to 0, and even below that, we're looking at an 8 to 9, possibly 10% increase. So the 8-minute becomes closer to an 8:41. So you can see it is more gradual. You're not getting like 3 to 5% chunks. You're getting 1 to 2% chunks, but it is going to start to leave a mark. What I always suggest, because I actually think these are on the more extreme, if I'm going to be honest, this is a pace calculator that we use regularly as coaches. I will tell you, if you're based in Chicago or somewhere cold, we are hardier than the rest of the world. You just are. We see it, especially our athletes that run outside. We see them, we know it. They do better than these projections, but you have to train in it in order to be good in it. So if you are not as good in it, and there's no shade, like maybe you're just not, just like I'm not as great in heat right now, right? I'm much better in cold. You are probably going to want to start your runs a little bit more conservatively. So if you are, let's say, racing in extreme cold and you haven't practiced in it, let's say this weekend is 20 degrees, right? So we know your 8-minute pace should be around an 8:07. I would start the race closer to 8:15 and get yourself acclimated, get yourself warmed up, and then if you have another gear, start to chop it down. Don't gun for the goal pace and not train in it, and have it be very, very cold. And really, that's just progressive pacing too.
Yeah. So an important note about this, you just mentioned that your pace would drop. So say if you were an 8-minute runner, 8-minute miler at 50 degrees, and you were running at 10 degrees, you're going to be 5 to 6% slower. So say 8:26, 8:30, right? That's going to be at the same effort level,
yep.
right? And so I think a lot of us don't consider this. Like,
yeah, it's true.
Even all the way up the temperature chart to 80s, 90s. Like it gets in the 80s, and we understand we're going to slow down. But I don't think people understand that the temperature really does make a difference in how you're going to feel and how much energy you're going to exert. So it's really difficult to compare training days. Like if you were doing a tempo run in a 50-degree day versus a tempo run in a 15-degree day, that's going to be a really different feeling on your body. And, we have to consider that so that we're not beating ourselves up over not hitting specific paces because of the ways that this sort of changes.
Yeah, no, it's totally true. Yeah, effort above all else as a gauge.
Yeah.
So temperature, we know, is one of the most significant external factors that is going to affect running performance. We see this at things like the Olympics. We see this at things like F3, right? It always is going to be the variable that's the most talked about. We know that cold weather, of course, tends to improve our efficiency, allow for faster paces, and we know that generally speaking, hot and humid conditions are going to slow you down by 5, 10 more %. And it doesn't even need to go that high, depending on the severity. Understanding how temperature impacts your body can actually help you adjust your expectations, train safely, race well, and make the necessary changes to your routine.
Yeah, as Outcast says, you can plan a pretty picnic, but you can't control the weather. So the best thing... Did you know that one?
No, but we're going to use that for the...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you can plan a pretty picnic, but you can't control the weather, and it's really important for you to get out there and train in this if you plan on racing in this and executing to the best of your ability.
I'm going to always remember that.
Good. I'm glad.
Till next time! That was so good!
Thanks for listening to Coach Quip. Original music performed by Mend. Follow us online on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Edge Athlete Lounge. Our podcast lives in the blog section of our website. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast, and you can check out the show notes for additional ways to contact us. Ready, set, onward we go.